Hello everyone, my name is Kristin Abujan, and for today's virtual conference, I will be presenting on Alexei Navalny and the Russian government. Specifically, my hope throughout this presentation is that I ultimately convince you that this case of Alexei Navalny is not a singular instance, but is part of a broader phenomenon that has been a clear human rights issue that has been ineffectively dealt with. The article that I used to identify this human rights issue is from the Washington Post. It's from 2021, April 9th, and it's entitled, "Putin is slowly murdering Alexei Navalny. Here's how the US can save him." Specifically, if I were to connect this issue to content we've learned in class, I would classify this human rights issue as a violation of Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that no one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. So, now that we know what issue we'll be talking about, who exactly is Alexei Navalny, and why is his case a human rights issue? Scholar Alexander Etkin puts it very accurately when he describes Navalny as a single-issue journalist and politician. Although Navalny has never officially ran for presidency against the current president, Vladimir Putin, many call Navalny Putin's greatest political opponent. People continue to call him this, not just for his actions, but mainly because of his online platform. You see, Alexei Navalny most often uses YouTube to upload videos that educate and expose the corruption that is currently happening within the Russian government. He uses well-researched facts, collects evidence, as well as uses humor to inform Russians on the high levels of corruption that are currently happening. In fact, in the summer of 2020, Navalny was set to release his biggest expose video thus far, entitled Putin's Palace. This video was to expose the immense fortune that has been embezzled, stolen, by Putin and other government leaders, as well as the ties that Russian businesses have over the country's affairs. But while on a plane right before the video was to be uploaded, Navalny was poisoned by a nerve agent called Novichok, causing him to be paralyzed and emergency lifted to a Berlin hospital, where he received medical attention. It is widely accepted that this incident is not an accident, but was actually planned by the Russian government to stun the expose video from being released. You see, upon returning to reasonable health in Berlin, and upon flying and returning to Russia, Navalny was immediately arrested, trialed, and found guilty for a minor charge from his past. In other words, he was arbitrarily arrested and taken to a prison camp that is notorious for having horrible, harsh living conditions. You see, during his time in the prison camp, Navalny had been woken up hourly to ensure his continual and systematic sleep deprivation. He was denied proper medical treatment for a herniated disc in his back, as well as denied medical treatment for tuberculosis. And moreover, when approached by the press, Putin refuses to confirm whether or not he will allow Navalny to leave prison alive. It is very clear from his poisoning, to his arbitrary arrest, to his horrible treatment in the prison camp, that Navalny has been cruelly tortured and punished. But Navalny is but one of many cases. According to Sarah Mendelsohn, there are countless cases in which the Russian government have beaten, falsely accused, imprisoned, and even killed its political opponents, such as Sergei Magnitsky, who actually died in a prison camp, and who was in a very similar situation to Navalny. He exposed the embezzlement that was currently happening in the Russian government, and he was arrested, and he died in the prison camp during his time there. So, now that we know that this has been a clear human rights issue, what has been done to address this human rights issue, and have these actions been effective? The first group that we are going to examine is a group of actors who are called Navalny supporters. According to Sevenkov, Alexei Navalny has grown an immense following, and upon Navalny's arrest, many of his supporters have begun to stage public acts in hopes of bringing attention to and ultimately demanding the release of Navalny from prison. Although, when we assess the effectiveness of his supporters' actions to end Navalny's torture and cruel punishment, the results have been quite bleak and ultimately can be assessed as ineffective. Reading from our main article here, it says, on Tuesday, 9 of his supporters, including several doctors, traveled to his prison camp to demand that he receive proper medical treatment. They were arrested and later sentenced to a week in prison. Again, as I said in slides previously, this case is now growing even more so where it's not a single human rights violation, but is now a string of instances where Russia continues to arbitrarily arrest its political opponents. The next group that has acted in the face of this human rights issue has been the European Union. The most notable action of the EU has been its sanctioning power over Russia. According to X, the EU, upon reviewing Navalny's case, has placed horizontal sanctions on the parties responsible for Navalny's poisoning. In other words, the EU has placed travel bans, they have frozen the accounts of those that they can identify as responsible only for the poisoning of Navalny. But despite this seeming success, the EU's actions can actually be assessed as ineffective because they have not been effective in ensuring Navalny's safe release from prison. But in terms, like I said, of Navalny's release from enduring more cruel punishment, the EU remains ineffective and powerless to free him from prison. According to scholar Roger Cannot, Russia is not an official part of the EU, and therefore the organization has no real authority over its state affairs, and this leads to much conflict between the two parties. According to scholar Hakala and Mendelssohn, the EU is often very wary of questioning the sovereignty of the Russian state and avoids using any hard power to correct the state's human rights issues. In a very similar way, many are calling the US government to intervene as well. And to its credit, the US has made attempts to do this. The issue was discussed in the House of Representatives, and the body enacted its Sergei Magnitsky Rule of Law Accountability Act of 2012. This act was created by the US after the death of Magnitsky to ensure that no other political opponent would die at the hands of the Russian government. But again, this act was only used to investigate the poisoning and to sanction those found guilty, not to demand Russia to release Navalny from his punishment in prison. The US, like the EU, has a limited amount of power and cannot force or encroach upon the sovereignty of Russian state leaders to act in any certain way. Overall, after assessing the actions of Navalny's supporters, the EU, and the US government, we can see that they have all been ineffective in ensuring Navalny's safe release. Overall, I hope this presentation was able to convince you that Navalny's case is indeed just one in a larger phenomenon of abuses against the political opponents of the Russian government. This case is still ongoing. That's why I say that all the actions have been ineffective, because Navalny still remains in prison. But him and his followers continue to urge Western international governments, specifically the US, to take greater actions. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and maybe learned something new. I'm going to close off here, but the last 10 seconds of this video will be all my scholarly references and all the references for the pictures used. Thank you so much for listening.